So we want to get another take on all of this now and turn to Congressman Marlin Stutzman, the Republican representing Indiana's 3rd District, who is back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, always good to see you here on Balance of Power. For your constituents in the 3rd District in Indiana, what is the ideal outcome of this Rose Garden announcement? What balance do you hope President Trump strikes when it comes to tariffs?
Well, I think, Kayleigh, in the long run, the goal is to have free and fair trade. One of the things that has happened over time is that other countries have, tariffed American goods going into their country, but we have very low tariffs on those countries. For example, Brazil, they charge 35% tariffs on U.S. cars going into Brazil, where we only charge them 2.5%. Coming into the United States, and I understand that, some countries don't have the competitive advantages that we do, but we're the largest economy, and we should also believe that our partners, whether it's Brazil or whether it's the European Union or Japan and others, that it's good for both sides. And over time, what's happened is tariffs have built up against the American producer, and I think that what President Trump is doing today is leveling the playing field. There needs to be a reset to make sure that American productivity is respected and protected.
So are you hoping then for a targeted approach today from President Trump, or should it be an across-the-board levy and we'll bring things down as countries respond?
Well, I don't know. We'll see what President Trump lays out. But I know from as we look through different situations, one, for example, is Australian beef. I come from Northeast Indiana. We're in the agricultural space and manufacturing space. And my guess is that President Trump will take a targeted approach at where he thinks it will have the most impact, but then also where, reciprocal tariffs could be de-escalated, and hopefully other countries will say, well, look, we could back these all down to zero. Let's have a free and fair trade. But for example, with Australian beef, all the way back to mad cow, if you remember, which has almost been 20 years ago, but Australia banned American beef from going to Australia. But America, we take a large amount of Australian beef here into the United States. And one of those breeds particular that I'm familiar with is Wagyu, and Australian Wagyu is about 50% of the American consumption. And so they're not willing to buy any of our product in Australia because of the ban. And so I believe that, we should tariff their beef coming into the United States. That way we have a conversation. And I'll tell you already, Joe, that they're calling and wanting to talk. And it's like, well, why do you have the ban on from 20 years ago? We're friends. Let's have a reciprocal relationship when it comes to beef. And so I think that's also the tool that President Trump is using, is to have those conversations with countries that they just simply have been ignored on the tariff issue for many, many years.
But should it, Congressman, actually be President Trump's tool to use? Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution says the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Is this really the right way to go about it? Isn't your role as a legislator to tackle things like this, not the role of the executive?
Well, I think, we work together. I'm not sure that every, member of Congress supports every tariff. I'm sure that it's going to go district by district in some cases. For us, in the 3rd District, we're a heavy manufacturing district. So the steel industry, which has a heavy presence in the Fort Wayne area, this is going to be helpful. Agriculture, yeah, there's some uncertainty about it. But I think that President Trump is really leading on this, and then we can codify, or we can have that debate in Congress. But I think the fact that he's leading on it is really helpful. He can take, the perspective from a macro level and talk about where there's inconsistencies or imbalances. And then, those of us in Congress, we can react accordingly. But I know that the America First agenda is a top priority for the Republican conference in the House. Speaker Mike Johnson has also been working very closely with President Trump on so many different issues that I know that the leadership for the House Republican Conference will be leading on this issue as well, supporting the president.
At one point, the conversation was about raising revenue, Congressman, and that revenue was going to help to pay for extending the Trump tax cuts. Is that still part of the picture here, or are you waiting to learn that like we are today?
I think it's still part of the picture. I was in a meeting the other day where the Congressional Budget Office actually said that they would consider taking in some of the tariff revenue as part of the budget as we're working through that. That was new information. We were told at the beginning of the year that they wouldn't consider tariff revenue for budgetary conversations, but I think that it should. And so I think as this moves forward, the picture will become more clear over time. But I don't necessarily see it just as a revenue piece. I really do see it as a trade balance where we have to reset with a lot of countries around the world who are our friends. And think about the money that we have spent as Americans globally for the defense of allies, and not only for ourselves but for the defense of our allies, that we've never received anything back for that. And so I think that the relationships that we have, we're a very generous nation, we're a very giving nation, and I know that Americans love to give, but at the same time, when there's $36 trillion of debt, we have a deficit and an economy that is struggling. There's got to be a new look at things, and that's what President Trump has done and brought the tariff conversation to the table.
Well, we're glad to have your perspective on this, Congressman, as you sit on the Budget Committee in the House. Meantime, the Budget Committee in the Senate and the chair of it, Lindsey Graham, it was suggested by Senate Republican leadership yesterday, could have the power to decide the policy baseline of the Senate's budget blueprint on his own, even if the parliamentarian doesn't rule that the current policy baseline is appropriate. Does that give you concern about the potential future of this legislation? Does it have to come from the Senate parliamentarian for it to have your confidence that it can get all the way through both chambers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually in a meeting yesterday with the Treasury Secretary, Bessent, who was talking a little bit about this. He was actually getting ready to go down to the Senate to have a meeting, and that was one of the topics that was brought up. And, and I think that, on both sides of the chamber, both sides of the House and the Senate want to, follow the process, but there's also concern about the parliamentarians' position and authority and their opinion or her opinion, and then also, Congressional Budget Office is another one. So I think that Scott Bessent has been doing a fantastic job of helping with the discussion and looking at this from a perspective, because the scoring that the CBO takes doesn't always take in dynamic scoring. And one thing that we do know is that we want to keep the Trump tax cuts in place. If we can make them permanent, that would be ideal. Even if we have to extend them for 5 years, I would support that. But either way, it's really critical to keep the tax rates where they're at. This would affect, if they would go up, it would really affect small businesses across the country. And I know that's one of their top priorities.